I think already I'm here today and you are also here. Annie, we have Dr. Abha Chawla who will be introducing you. And Abha, let's start. I think it's time already. I know Annie since last 6-7 years or more than that. And we have a forum called GRFDT where Annie is a very active member. And we used to meet every month and organize some seminar. And since then we have been keeping in touch, and then I requested her to give a talk on Armenian diaspora because this is part of our program also, where we have so many diasporas within India. We have a full course on that. So she kindly agreed, and thank you, Ani, for that. And now I request her to formally introduce. Abhay, your voice is not coming. Maybe you can just remove the mic, directly you can speak. No, we are not able to hear. Abhay, we are not able to hear you. Abhay, we are not able to hear you. Ani, are you able to hear him? No.
No, I am not able to hear.
Okay. So I think Abhay has some problem with his mic. So I will be introducing Ani. Ani's full name is Dr. Ani Yeremyan, who holds PhD from JNU, from School of International Studies. And she has been working on Armenian diaspora in India, especially she did field work in Calcutta, and she has done extensive, field work on Armenians, and several generations of Armenians are here, and she studied that. Besides that, she has been regularly publishing paper on this area, attending conference, and then she has been a strong member of Global Research Forum on diaspora and transnationalism. And besides that, she has been again doing lots of activities within the Armenian community. And her PhD thesis is, about the identity of Armenian diaspora and identity and how it is shifting over generation. So besides that, she has been now working with the Armenian embassy and so many other things also she is doing academically. So with this brief introduction, I request Dr. Ani Yeremyan to start her talk. Ani, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sao sir, for the introduction and for the invitation for delivering a lecture for the students. And Today, I just wanted to have my talk on the Armenian diaspora in general and to posit the Armenian diaspora as another social construct within other diasporas. But I'm not sure what is your syllabus, whether you have studied already about other diasporas or not. But I would like to start with the introduction of what is diaspora, because there are different theories and different approaches as to what is diaspora and whether the diasporas and the migration flows are the same or not. So maybe some introduction on that I would like to give. And if you see that there is any problem with my internet, I'm very sorry for that. You can just give a message. I will try to fix it. So let's start.
In case you want to use your PPT? No.
No, I will just talk because I think if I use the PPT, then the focus on my talk will be lost. So it's, yeah. So what is diaspora? You already might know that diaspora and the mobility of people is already has a long history. And in most scholarly articles, it is accepted that diaspora is derived from the Greek word diasporan, which stands for scattering. But let's take now some focus on this scattering, the word scattering, what it means. It's not just a mere dispersion, but it is presumed to be the reproduction of the organism. Hence, violence, destruction were the original implications of diaspora used in the history of the Peloponnesian War. And here the Greek word diaspora denoted the exile of the population across the Hellenic world. Therefore, for the initial concepts that describe diaspora were the rupture, scattering, reproduction, and like this. But in theoretical discourse, the word diaspora is also widely defined as in general terms, as the dispersal of people from the original homeland. And in his article, Connor, you might know him, the article which is called The Impact of Homelands Upon Diasporas, note that despite large number of migrations, only a comparatively small percentage of the world's population live within an ethnic homeland. He adds that a tentative definition of a diaspora in this regard might well be that segment of people living outside the homeland. So broadly speaking, theories on diaspora, we can the theories of diaspora, they can fall into the following categories. One group of the authors classify diaspora based on the characteristic features, which may be the ethnic myth, religion, language, other cultural characteristics of the community, which is in regard to the host country and in its constituent part. But another group of scholars, they try to focus on the push and pull factors of diaspora formation. So now let's see. When within this larger category, the diaspora of these Jewish diasporas and the Greek Armenian diasporas, they might be taken as a non-normative starting point for a discourse that is traveling hybridization in the new global context. But in many diaspora theories, the hyphenated term ethno-national is very noteworthy. To some extent, it helps to distinguish the diasporic communities from other communities or social constructs, namely from migration flows. It also stresses the circumstances when the members of the dispersed group consider themselves belonging to nations that have common ethnic and national traits, common identities and affinities. In this sense, Schaeffer makes an interesting argument when he talks about diasporas. He says that only when members of such groups migrate to and settle in territories that are not immediately adjacent to their original homelands do they form incipient diasporas, which later on develop into established diasporas. So, in this case, in recent decades, the three flows, that of people, capital, information, dynamically related and interwoven together, are generating some intensive effects that are said to be distinctive. Due to the so-called trans-state communications, nowadays diasporas maintain contact with their homeland and other scattered communities of the same origin. These trans-state means of communication served as media for ancient and medieval diasporas, particularly trade diasporas, or those engaged in commerce, such as the Jewish, overseas Chinese, and Armenians. The activities of those diasporas are now equal to circulation of news, making of cultural heritage in host countries, advancement in education in those communities, transfer of economic, cultural, political resources to homelands, as well as to other diaspora communities. In this context, transnational communities become the paradigmatic other of the nation state. This is a term used by Tololian. On the other hand, if this is making the diasporas more established, then on the other hand, the combination of the above mentioned flows, or like I mentioned, the people, capital, and information, they may also break the autonomy, sovereignty, and the territorial boundaries of the nation states. However, if the ethno-national diasporism is more established, then its capacities will enable the diasporic community to strengthen not only diplomatic but also economic ties between the host country and the home country. This will not violate the territorial boundaries or the sovereignty of the nation state. Here, what matters more in this context, after the establishment of the nation states, and in case of Armenia, it's the post-genocide period, then after that, the collapse of the USSR, is where the personal and collective identity find its home in the context of constant mobility and shifting identities. So the question is whether it is within or beyond the nation state boundaries with its imaginaries. The question to be confronted is whether the nation state as a new form of political organization that defines a singular identity also holds true for diaspora within multiple belongings. As a matter of fact, the image of home is based on cultural perception of a place, and it is something that is context-based in case of an interpersonal communication. After all, it may be accepted that diaspora is also a social construct, like I mentioned initially, founded on categories such as feeling, consciousness, memory, mythology, history, meaningful narratives, group identity, longings, dreams, all of which play a role in establishing a diaspora reality. Now let's locate the Armenian diaspora as a social construct among other diasporic communities. Due to historical reasons, out of 11 million Armenians, more than 8 to 9 million live outside their homeland. About 3 million Armenians live in the post-Soviet countries, and 2.5 million live in America, Europe, Near and Far East, Africa, and Australia. As one of the Armenian scholars rightly notes, his name is Panosyan, he mentions that writing about Armenia and the Armenians entails writing about dispersion and diaspora. The major cause of dispersion of the Armenians was the loss of sovereignty over the territories, invasion by nomadic groupings until the present borders were fixed in 1921. It is generally accepted that modern diaspora was caused by genocide. I mean, the modern Armenian diaspora. Based on this understanding, the scholarly literature on the Armenian diaspora classifies it as a victim diaspora, as a conflict generated diaspora, which served as an example of an archetypal diasporic community. Crucial historical events that led Armenians to be characterized as a victim diaspora was caused by the massacres of the late 19th century and the forced displacement during 1915-1916 by the Ottoman Turks to the territories of Syria and Palestine. Many Armenians subsequently migrated to France and the USA. Apart from subjugation by foreign invaders, long period of economic and cultural decline was also another reason of the dispersal and formation of the Armenian diaspora. So being located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, Armenia had a history of struggle against foreign invaders to preserve the statehood, the faith, the territory, the culture, and finally the Armenian identity, which entails the language, religion, folk traditions, which also includes the marriage institution within the diasporic community. For introducing the politics of the Armenian diaspora, let's just, it is mostly preferred, and let's divide it into three broad periods. Before the genocide, after the genocide, which also includes the Soviet period, the Sovietization, and finally the post-independence period of the Republic of Armenia, which starts from the 1991. The pre-genocide period is significant because the earliest indicators of modern Armenian identity can be traced to these diaspora communities made up of mostly national elite of wealthy merchants. These diasporic communities not only engaged in trade, but they also became significant centers of culture, providing important sources of cultural markers of national identity. For example, the first Armenian book was published in Venice. It was not at all published in Armenia in 1511, and the first modern political tract was published in Madras, India, between 1772 and 1789, again by merchants. Another interesting book, again published in Madras, India, in 1773, with the title Vorogait Parats, which is translated like a trap of glory, was by Jacob Shahamirian. It was thought to be a manual for the constitution of future Armenia, which would be democratic in spirit. And the concept of law was stressed by him, making a conclusion that law should emerge from the will of the people and not from the whim of a monarch or the customs of the past centuries. That book was comprised of 521 articles, giving details about the implementation of law in a future Armenia. The example set by Madras was later emulated by the Armenians in Kolkata, where the first printing press was started in 1797 through the efforts of Father Joseph Stephan, an officiating priest of the Armenian Church. The most significant feature of this period was that through printed books, materials, journals, national consciousness was evolving in diaspora. And I would like to say something that this was the period when the first constitutions were being established all over the world. I mean, this was also the period of the nation-state emergence around the world. And the first draft of this Armenian constitution, it was actually the first one for the Armenian state and the Armenian people around the world, which was drafted not within the territories of the nation-state of Armenia, but within diaspora, and that was in the diasporic community established in India at that time. The most significant feature, as I mentioned, was through the books and materials journals to develop national consciousness. However, as the homeland was divided between empires during this period, due to various diaspora sources of identity, Armenian national identity emerged in more than one center or locations. Therefore, they were diverse in their cultural affinities and composition. The emergence of the national identity in this period was multi-local and multifaceted. Therefore, it was heterogeneous also. Hence, the homogenization concept or the argument of nationalism through diaspora, it may fail here because of the multi-local and heterogeneous communities existing around the Armenian diaspora's communities in different parts of the world. Although there was they shared one national belonging. I mean that singular national belonging, which was belonging to the Armenian nation, let's say. And they felt as part of a shared nation based on their religion and a language and also common ancestry. And it may be observed that they also had less in common in terms of their traditions and their dialects also. During these centuries, the role of the state, as I mentioned already, in creating national identity was very limited. The Armenian case shows that the 18th century Armenian merchants played a similar role in the financing and directing endeavors of national identity creation as did states in Europe at that time. A turning point for the evolution of the modern Armenian diaspora and the Armenian identity was the genocide in the early 20th century. In fact, some authors consider the Armenian diaspora as one which emerged only after these atrocities that led to exile. The genocide forced Armenians worldwide to carry out a struggle for preserving their national identity by establishing churches, schools, and other organizations. We can rightly say that this period marked the emergence of an institutionalized multi-local Armenian diaspora that were established from east to west, not only by wealthy merchants or their networks, but also by different groups. National identity was reinterpreted and reformulated newly during this period. History, common myths, new symbols became important as in this period. It is needless to say that each of these dimensions had a different set of myths, symbols, and imaginations which defined Armenianness. But despite these differences, the subjective sense of belonging to the nation overrides the symbolic and even cultural variations inherent in the widely dispersed collective known as the Armenian nation. The invention of the Armenian alphabet in early 5th century supplied another element of uniqueness to the identity. As Armstrong notes in his article, all mobilized diasporas preserve their distinct language for internal use. Many scholars accept that the post-1915 period, the post-genocide period, was a breakthrough in the reconstruction of the Armenian identity, which basically happened in various diasporic communities worldwide. Consequently, in this period, two other narratives, that of the genocide, exile, and homeland, became prevalent as well, along with other narratives and myths. In this context, it has to be noted that after the genocide, the narrative of homeland became ambivalent. The reason is that the majority of modern diasporans came from Western Armenia, which is now in Eastern Turkey, and hence no more in the actual territory of the Republic of Armenia. Due to this ambivalence, the older diasporas had to work out the gap between a mythical homeland and an actual steppe homeland on behalf of the present Republic of Armenia. The historic homeland is more spiritual, and it is sustained by myth. which helps to give a sense of unity to the heterogeneous as well as multi-layered Armenian diaspora. This happens also because after a few generations, the memory about life and about those places in homeland fades and it becomes part of a mythical narrative. If the narrative of homeland involves mainly a desire to return home as an important characteristic of diaspora, then in this case, even the return home to homeland becomes ambivalent. There is a notion of a lost homeland in historic Armenia. Hence, the homeland may not be a fixed territory to which diaspora can trace its roots. It can be those sites, cultural roots in the past with history, memory, as well as the present included in it. In this regard, Armenian diaspora is confined to the spiritual mythical realm and functions as a tool to build group cohesion and identity. Therefore, the Armenian ethnicity as well as unity among the Armenian diasporic community is based on shared language, common religion, a collective memory, and remembrance of genocide. However, there is a divide in the Armenian collective identity. In this regard, Panosian calls it a multi-local perspective. The multi-local identity firstly manifested itself in the differences between the Eastern and the Western dialects of the language. Secondly, in the modern historical period, the homeland diaspora duality became actual. As Panosian notes, two identity points from various centers narrowed to two overall tracks. One was the Sovietized Republic of Armenia, the other was the post-genocide diaspora. Tololian also argues that the Armenian diasporic communities differ in a few aspects, such as social behavior, their culture, and language. Drawing from this, now let's see the period of the post-independence Armenia, Republic of Armenia, and the engagement with the home country as drawn in the government policies. As far as the category of diaspora is concerned, the more flexible notion will be taken into consideration in this regard. Armenian state considers the economic and political potential of their diasporas seriously. Therefore, we may say that the policies focused on home connect are to strengthen diaspora engagement in the affairs related to their respective home countries. Despite the heterogeneous nature of the diasporic communities, these policies are meant to cut these differences. Therefore, the semantic approach towards the term diaspora evolves as dispersion from home. In this respect, the positive meaning of diaspora is prioritized, not the traumatized or the colonized context. In this respect, we may also know that from the mid-1960s onwards, it became more popular in some social circles to identify themselves with the boundaries of a nation and be united by a common heritage, ancestry, civilization, language, ethnicity, and race. The process of diasporization entails constant construction of diasporic identity in relation to the nation and their belonging. In fact, different dimensions of belonging shape a more complex diaspora. In this case, the role of the home country comes to the fore as a focal return point for diverse diasporic communities. In this respect, the institution of state delivers policies on diaspora home connect, which in their turn ensure the continuity of their diasporic identity in relation to their home and belonging. Despite the fact that many of the Armenian diasporic communities do not identify themselves with the current nation-state boundaries of the Republic of Armenia as their ancestral homeland, I already mentioned that it was not in the actual territory of the Republic of Armenia, but in their lost homeland, which was in the eastern Turkey. Armenia is still a symbolic geographic location where they look back. In this respect, there is a bridge between their longing and belonging. It is observed that both Armenia works on involving various diasporic communities in the development of their home country. Like one of the events, which is called the Armenia Diaspora Summit or Global Armenian Summit, is perhaps the best example of asserting the significant role of diaspora. And the last Global Armenian Summit was held last year in October 2022 and the summit serves as a dynamic forum for representatives of the diaspora, together with their local counterparts, to discuss the most pressing challenges, strategic questions of pan-Armenian significance. The agenda of the summit included topics such as national security, protecting Armenians' interests globally, repatriation, economic engagement, preservation of the Armenian identity, diaspora representation within Armenia's governing structures, and self-organization within the diaspora. Effects of diasporas on the country of origin depend also both on the characteristic features of the diaspora and the conditions and policies of the home country. In this respect, another initiation, eGorts, is a program that was initiated by the government of Armenia. It is interesting because this program invites professionals from Armenian diaspora to serve in the public sector of the government of Armenia for 1 year. Since 2020, every year 50 diaspora Armenians have been selected to work in Armenia by contributing to the development of programs and policies within the government institutions in Armenia. Field of expertise ranges from political science to engineering, financing, and environmental studies. In the Armenian case, we may also agree that this policy is being implemented effectively, as some of these diaspora professionals decide to stay back in Armenia after their tenure is over. They become integrated in the Armenian society and continue working in various public sectors in their home country. And in other words, a new way of thinking and approach from outside is also required in Armenia, and the agency of diaspora is applied in this case. Diaspora Youth Ambassador is another policy that is aimed to connect young members of diaspora members with their home country, and this program was initiated in 2021. And they are assigned in their respective host countries to implement cultural programs, and not only for the youth in the diaspora, it also helps them to be better involved in their community life. As for the investments, diaspora Armenians noted during this Pan-Armenian Summit that there is still a gap between diaspora and the Ministry of Economy. And the government of Armenia, for this purpose, established Enterprise Armenia, which is the National Investment Promotion Authority of Armenia. Their mission is to promote and facilitate foreign and domestic investment. In the current digital era, countries rely on online and digital tools also for promoting their culture among various diaspora communities. The digital tools also help in the homecoming, partially, and for emotionally connecting various diasporas with their home countries. In its turn, Armenia initiates online portals also for learning the Armenian language and to be culturally connected with the homeland. It may be argued that diaspora is an agent for the existence of Armenians outside the boundaries of Armenian state. In other words, diaspora may also be considered as a strategic partner for the home country, as it plays an immense role in political lobbying for various social and political issues occurring in the home country. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ani. I think you have given a good perspective about Armenian diaspora and their involvement back home and their spread across the globe. So I think we'll take around 20 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever. We can have some question answer. So if anybody has question, please, you can directly ask.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Ma'am, you told that in politics we can divide them into three phases. That is, post-independence from 1991 is the third phase. So in the post-independent phase, we are seeing conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan for certain areas. So what is the impact of that war on the diasporic community?
Yes, I think Ani, you can answer this and others will ask one by one.
Yeah, thank you for the question. You rightly mentioned about the conflict, which is also not a stagnant conflict as such. It is developing day by day, and new developments are coming up. And you rightly mentioned that the role of diaspora is very important in this case. But the role of the, like I mentioned in the engagement of the diaspora with the homeland, in this sense, we may mention about the investments, because Armenia and Armenian diaspora considers that the investment and in the home country, I mean the investment in culture and education, is more important. This is one part of that diaspora engagement, and the second part, as I also mentioned, is lobbying, political lobbying in foreign countries. And during the I am not sure if you know about it or not, in 2020 there was a 44-day war, and in this period, because of the COVID lockdowns and everything, the political lobbying took a different direction. It was mostly taken through the online social networks, by raising awareness about the human rights violations, about atrocities occurring during the war, about the misinformation by the international broadcasting companies and all. So this is the role of the, I'm not sure if I answered your question correctly. I'm not correctly, but if I addressed your question the way you wanted to. But yeah, there are two. We can divide it into two parts: the diaspora engagement and the role of diaspora in this case. One is the cultural, educational, which is investing in the home country for schools, churches, or I don't know, the language in this sense. And the other one is lobbying in their host countries to raise awareness about about all these things which I mentioned. So that's it.
Adi, I have a question. Like you told, the total Armenian population is around 18 million. How much?
No. The total Armenian population is around 11 million.
So out of that, around 3 million or little more, they are living in Russia. So
yeah, around 3 million.
so that is a very huge, in fact, 1/4 of the total population almost. So how is their role? Because Russia is a big, geopolitically very influential country in that region. And how is their role, especially those Armenian people living in Russia, how is their role in, all kinds of, geopolitics
Yeah,
and
sir. So yeah, as I already discussed in my this presentation. So when we divide the when we talk about the Armenian diaspora, this post-independence period is specifically is related to the Armenian diaspora in Russia. I mean, Armenian diaspora in Russia is the one which may fall in this post-independence period. And in some theoretical approaches or by some authors, this diaspora is not considered to be, it is considered to be an internal diaspora, because before the independence, I mean, when it was the Soviet period, these people used to live in the Soviet, I mean, in Russia as another country of the Soviet Union. So they were not considered to be diaspora as such. That's why after the post-independence, now they are considered as an internal diaspora. And if we in this case, if we take into consideration the pull and push factors, this is not a diaspora which was caused by the atrocities. They are like mostly economic diasporas, which was caused by the economic migrations, let's say. So in the classic theory of diaspora, some authors may not consider it as a diaspora as such, but because if we consider the generations, the cultural heritage and everything, in some to some extent they are just an internal diaspora. And as to the role in the current geopolitical developments, like this diaspora is mostly, like I mentioned, is an economic one, and their role, I would not consider it to be to have a big political or like political effect on the current for the Armenian state, on in relation to the Armenian state in the current geopolitical order, because they are, as I mentioned, they are like an internal diaspora, and mostly they are like more focused on the economic development. And of course we get their role is mostly for the economic transfer, for the development of their nation state or the homeland, and mostly they are through the families of these migrants. We can rightly call them migrants, not like a diaspora community, because in some in Russia they are not like, they don't have an established diasporic community which can have a singular opinion about the things going on in the world or in Armenia or whatsoever. Yeah.
Thank you, Hani. And I want to ask one supplementary question. Like, you have been in India for about, I think, 5 to 6 years, and you have been familiar with Indian diaspora because you have been member of JRBT and listening to lots of Indian diaspora related issues. So how to compare Armenian diaspora and Indian diaspora strength and weakness, all these things, how to see?
Yeah, that's a good question to think over. Like there are differences also, and there are commonalities with common features between Indian and Armenian diasporas. Like the common thing which exists between these two diasporas is the atrocity. Or like in the case of the Indian diaspora, it was the indentured labor, which caused the first major wave of the forced migration from the homeland to different countries. And in the case of Armenia, it was the genocide. So this is to some extent, this is a common feature of the evolving or the emergence of the two different diasporas. And from the cultural perspective, in this case, these two diasporas are strongly rooted in their cultural affinities, and they are belonging to their respective. I know that there are many cultures as such in India. There is no singular culture in India, and each respective community is related to their culture, to their cultural roots in India. The same goes with the Armenian one. And for the political lobbying also, Armenian and Indian diasporas are doing almost the same. And there is also an important thing to know that Indian diaspora, the Indian community and the Armenian community in the US, if you are aware, I'm not sure, they started collaborating for their common cause in the US. But differences, yeah, even when I was mentioning about the engagement with the home country, as per the government policies, if you notice, they have this, when I mentioned about this Global Armenian Summit, we have the same in India, which is the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. These are the same things which has the same, these two events have the same purpose, to make the diaspora communities, which are very different in their cultural identifications, let's say, even language, culture and everything, it may be different for these two diasporas, but this event has one purpose: to bring them together for their belonging. Like I mentioned, the longing must be, maybe the longing is different for these diasporic communities, but the purpose of this event is to bring them together for the same belonging to the same home country, despite their differences within different communities, like in the first generation, second generation, and even the cause of the migration, which was different in different times of periods. Yeah.
So any other question?
Yes, I
Good
wanted to
afternoon.
ask,
One more question.
One by one. MS.
thank you, ma'am, for the lecture. I wanted to ask that the location of Armenia being a landlocked country, how does it impact the diasporic Ainu identity there? The fact that it is a landlocked country surrounded by big nations, how does it impact the diasporic Ainu identity there?
I think your question is more of a political, it has more a political context in that, but the diasporic identity is more of a cultural thing, which I prefer to look at. And I don't think that being landlocked has any relation for diasporic identity as such. It's my subjective opinion, but I think being landlocked or not being landlocked, it has nothing to do with the it may not have any effect to the identity of the diaspora. Just like I mentioned, even in this modern period of postmodern, let's say, of the online networking and everything. See, in this case, we don't even have any nation state. It is cross-cutting all the boundaries of the nation state. And for this, this is also another tool which is trying to affect the diaspora identity as such. But if you may elaborate your question more on what you mean, maybe I can see.
I just wanted to ask that the fact that if I look at the atlas where Armenia is, I'm just looking that it is a very small nation in terms of its location, in terms of its size. And the fact that smaller nations are kind of, they are kind of in not very, like the bigger nations sometimes subsume the smaller nations. So like Nepal in India, Nepal near India is also a landlocked nation. So the voice of Nepal is somewhat thwarted by the bigger nations. So my question was regarding how the location of any nation affects its identity.
Yeah, in that case, you are right. Now I understand your question. That's the thing. When I was mentioning about the preservation of the Armenian identity, that's another thing, which is the cause of this, like even the government policies, even these cultural different events, initiations. Armenia, you are right, it's landlocked, not only landlocked, but we have close borders with two of our neighbors. And we are as I also mentioned, we are on the crossroads of Europe and Asia, and we have many challenges, both geopolitical, economic, and everything. That is a reason, another reason for the like to preserve the Armenian identity. The diaspora agent becomes more important, not only politically, but culturally, so that the Armenian identity will not be lost. I'm not talking about the political or economic, but even the cultural. From the cultural perspective, also, you are right. Being like this, it affects the loss of the cultural. I mean, even like the. I don't mean only the religion or the practices, cultural practices, but I also mean for example, this cultural sites. Like for Armenia, those these are important. And being landlocked, it has a big role for for preserving the Armenian identity among these nations, which are also not so friendly, let's say. With which we have many challenges. So in that sense, you are right.
Thank you.
Anjali, you can ask directly.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon. I would just like to ask, what is the how do you say? What is the idea, or what is the sentiment of the second or third generation Armenians who are here in India regarding the genocide? Because I mean, like for example, the Tibetans of here, the younger generation can be quite divorced from the idea of the genocide, of the problems which their parents or their grandparents faced. So I just wanted to ask, what is the sentiment of the new generation Armenians in India, of the diaspora in India?
Yeah, that's a good question again. Thank you. I may talk very long about this, because you were talking about India, if I'm not mistaken, because the voice was my internet was not stable. But for India, there are different periods again. And we should remember that the Armenian community in India emerged much before the genocide happened. So the first few generations of the Armenians living in India, they had no relation with the genocide that happened in the Ottoman Empire. So they had no connection with that. But so the narrative of the nationhood, culture, identity was completely different before the genocide. But after the genocide, it changed. And I also mentioned about the mostly it took another turn in the reconstruction and the construction of the identity among the Armenians in India. But after the genocide, through books, through journals, through publications, various publications, and they were mostly in Armenian, which was not happening in other diaspora communities around the world, Armenian diaspora communities around the world. But in the consecutive years which followed the independence of India. Again, the narrative is changing because the community becomes it's decreasing, the number of people is decreasing, the community becomes very small in India, and they become they start distancing themselves from this narrative of genocide, and because of the small community as well. So it has like different periods. The most let's say we can stress only this after post-genocide period, which was significant for the publications, but that was a very small period. But we can also know this remembrance of genocide, which is like a term, like remembering of that event. And another thing is like the remembrance of genocide, which was a strong narrative within the community after post 1950s, 15s, and that was this was especially significant for various monuments, especially the one in Kolkata. And when we talk about the remembrance of genocide, the role of the host country is also important. And India was always a country which was very friendly to the Armenian community. If in other countries, like the preservation of your identity or remembering the most, let's say, the most significant events of your history is to some extent subdued in the host country, but in India it was different. India was a friendly country wherein the Armenian community was able to develop and reconstruct their identity as per the narratives of this or that period. And for this current generation of the Armenians living in India, again, it's very heterogeneous. The community within India is not at all the same, which was in the after 1940s, when the community, because of the economic difficulties, because of the nationalization occurring in the country, and because of the independence of India, the community became very diverse. And now we can see new flow of Armenians to come into India, which have, of course, in their memories, they have already this narrative of genocide, but because of the small size of the community, I can't say that they have a singular opinion about the genocide as such, but of course, through various events like conferences, seminars, and everything, they try to raise awareness. But you know that India is a big country. Of course, this is like the population of India is big, and one event happening here or there may not be that big as per the host country. So it also depends on that. I'm not sure if I may if you want about the political opinion, like their political stance on the genocide, and of course around various communities, Armenian communities, of course there is one singular political stance in regard to the genocide. But as for the cultural, I already mentioned that cultural and also economic, there were various generations of diasporic communities, different periods, and different flows of migrations. So culturally, they had different affinities, and also they related themselves to home country and the historical home differently. But of course, politically, yeah, it's the same stance as it is for the Republic of Armenia.
Yes, we have Veera and Jaya. These are two last questions because you have another talk just after Anish. So Veera. You can directly ask. Or if Veera has issue, Jaya, you can ask.
Okay, thank you for answering the earlier question, ma'am. I have one quick question. So the Armenian diaspora, which is living in Madras, okay, you said that they came after the conflict with the Turks.
In where, sorry?
So the Armenian diaspora in India, especially in the Madras, so they came after the conflict with Turks, right? So then they evolved as merchants, and then they worked as the laborers in the East India Company. Is the same diaspora or the second and third wave, like they came as traders or they came as laborers? Is there one community which evolved, or there are waves of displacement happened?
Yeah, thank you. I already mentioned that, yeah, they are different. Now there is a new emerging diasporic community, which I am not, I'm afraid to call them a diasporic community right now, because it's a new flow, a new migration flow coming to India. But before that, as I mentioned, they were mostly merchants. And after the independence of India, there were economic difficulties within their host countries, so they dispersed, like you mentioned. There are some few families which are the successors of those trade community members, but most of them, they are already in third countries adjacent to India, and not only, like in Australia, the biggest community which emerged after the independence of India, who already migrated to some third country for the new opportunities, because they were mostly economic diaspora. They were in India for trade purposes, so they started looking for new opportunities. And the first country where they migrated to, another third country, was Australia, and also the United Kingdom, England specifically. But there are only very few members who are left and who are the successors of those diasporic communities.
Okay, Veera, you have a question. Otherwise, Conrad has a question already. He mentioned.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, audible.
Yeah. Hi, madam. As you mentioned, Armenian diaspora has been categorized under victim diaspora, but as per our material, all these things, it is a trade as well as victim diaspora, right? Next one, second question is, in last couple of years, the conflict between the Azerbaijan and Armenia, what is the stand of Armenian diaspora towards that conflict? That's it.
Yeah, so as for the first question, I already mentioned that you are right, we categorize the Armenian diaspora as a classic diaspora, as a victim diaspora. But as I mentioned, we also distinguish 3-4 periods. As for these periods, time periods, we have the first post-genocide, the time period, which is the mostly the trade diaspora, and I already talked about it. And after the genocide only, it becomes the victim diaspora. Why victim? Because we also think that the established diasporic communities were emerging only after the post-genocide period. Because before that, when it was the trade diaspora, they were not established. Like even for India, in other, because they were mostly traders and they were looking for new opportunities, they were not institutionalized, established diasporic community in a certain location. They tend to move from one location to another for new opportunities, economic, and based on their economic preferences. And that's why we call it trade and victim diaspora. Victim, I already said, and the trade, both of them. This depends on about which time period we are talking about. If it's before the genocide, it is a trade diaspora. If it's after the genocide and we are talking about more institutionalized and more established diaspora, in this sense, we talk about the victim diaspora. And as for the conflict you were mentioning, the stance of the diasporic communities around the world is the same. it's the same. And can you please repeat? You were talking about only the stance of the Armenian diaspora, right, in the conflict. Of course, I already said that about the role of the Armenian diasporic communities as a strategic partner for the Armenian home country. In which sense? In, like I mentioned, political lobbying, which happens in different countries, and political lobbying is mostly about raising awareness about the on the rights of the human rights and everything which is happening during this conflict, during the wars. And we may also make a distinction and also the humanitarian role of the Armenian diaspora in this conflict. They are the first to come forward to give an assistance to the Armenian diaspora whenever anything is happening among the Armenian people within their home country. And the stance of the diaspora is always, it does not matter which diasporic community is in which country, they always have the same stance. But already, like the political lobbying, it also, like in many countries, the political lobbying is not legally, it is not allowed. So like in the US, it is the political lobbying is more powerful, not powerful in a way, but it is more effective, because you know that in the US, like, yeah, it is legally allowed, but in many other countries it's not. So the role of the Armenian diaspora we can consider from the political lobbying perspective. Yeah, that's it. If you want to ask like something.
Yes, I
else.
think Ranjit has asked one thing: the role of Indian diaspora after the disintegration of USSR. After the disintegration of Russia, he was mentioning.
The role of Indian diaspora, you mean, I could not understand it, like the role of Indian diaspora.
Maybe Ranjit thought that you are also expert on Indian diaspora because you have been here. So,
yeah. I'm not sure about the Indian diaspora in countries which were, but maybe if he talks about the Armenian community, Armenians in India, maybe he talks about this. If he's here, maybe he can, he or she, sorry, can elaborate it.
I think
I need to check about this, the role of Indian diaspora.
He'll elaborate. Yes.
Yes, may I come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to know, I'm aware there are, though the strength is less, we have Indian diaspora in many countries which have broken away from erstwhile USSR. So are you aware about some? So I wanted to know about their role. Maybe in Armenia, and in as I know one. There is small strength of the Indian diaspora in Azerbaijan also. What is their role? Any idea?
The role in what?
Role in political and other.
You want to say?
Yeah, like like the role of the Indian diaspora. If we talk about the post-independence period after the USSR, you may know that we have an increasing Indian community in Armenia, and like in every other post-Soviet countries, they are in mostly in medical studies. But whether they have any political role, I'm not sure if we can consider it a political role, because after all, they are like temporary diasporic community who come only for medical studies. They have different purpose of migration, not to be settled in the host country, but they are just like a temporary diasporic, like a community, which later on moves on from the host country, whether to their home country or to some other country for continuing of their studies. But in Armenia, the new trend is also, we have few families, if I'm not mistaken, that are settled in Armenia. But whether we can consider them to be a diaspora in a classic way of its understanding, whether they are a community that can have a political role in decision makings, because when we talk about the political role, then we first of all we mention about the decision making process, for example. But if we talk about the economic role, that's a different thing. Economically, of course, if they are settling here and they are establishing their own businesses, then yeah, they can have an economic role. But for the political role, I'm not sure if they can have, because they are not even an established community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ani. I think we have already crossed more than 1 hour, and your talk was very informative, conceptually very rich, because you have provided how diaspora as a concept evolved, and you contextualized the Armenian diaspora, its geographical spread, and geopolitics of diaspora and all this. It was very interesting, and more interesting I enjoyed actually when all the students they are interacting with you. In fact, that constitutes almost 50% of your time, and very happy that the students got so many insight from your talk, and the interactiveness from that is very interesting area. So we'll be again in future, we may invite you again, but thank you so much for sparing some time. And from Armenia, you are giving a talk. I think it may be odd time for you, and thank you for joining us, Ani.
Thank you so much. I hope I really delivered something useful for you.
Yes.
And if you have any more questions, then you can really contact me. I will be really happy to elaborate anything theoretically or geopolitically or anything. Thank you so much.
Ani, if I have some study material reference, you can share with me. If you have any study
Okay.
material like Armenians in India or something, you can. We have study material, but in case you get, it is not a very important thing. But if you get, please share with us. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have next talk is by Dr. Abhay Chawla. That is on East Asian diaspora. Very interesting.
South Asian.
South Asian. Yes, South Asian diaspora. That includes India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. This is a very conflict area also. All these South Asian diaspora, culturally they are so unique. They come together, but politically there's so much contradiction. It's a very interesting area, and Abha has a challenge to talk to you for 1 hour. Over to you, Abha.
Okay, so I'll straight away. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. There was some problem with the laptop,
Now
so I
it's
changed the laptop. So let me start with much ado. All the guys can hear me?
yes, we can hear.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. So let's start much ado. In fact, last time we did the Southeast Asian diaspora, and as we had talked about, typically in the West, the South Asian diaspora is not categorized as an Asian diaspora. It is categorized more as Indian. The Asians are more in terms of Chinese, Koreans, Japanese. They do not consider Indians as Asians. In fact, India becomes a very large part, and the South Asian diaspora is predominantly countries of the Indian subcontinent. And that is why the India becomes a very big part in the whole process. And also the fact is because this whole subcontinent has gone through a lot of tumult. So that becomes a very, a defining factor for this diaspora. So the objective is typically history of South Asian diaspora, diaspora engagement. And in the unit, Afghanistan diaspora is not mentioned, but I have picked up some nuggets of the Afghanis diaspora to give you a perspective about how, and we tend to miss out on a lot of countries, but I thought let me just pick out a few slides on Afghanistan. So South Asian is 7 countries: Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. There were many factors. Most of these places were colonized, so there was a large-scale migration during colonization. Then, of course, population. There is a huge demographic pressure, which leads to migration, economic, social, and political reasons, which again leads to migration. And then the latest is the better opportunities instead of study in terms of employment, family reunion. So we'll try and trace a little bit about the history, how they moved about. So if you look, I got this slide which shows the various stages of Indian or the South Asian migration to various parts of the world. And if you see, they are color coded in terms of difference of timing or the quality of migration. So I believe the dotted lines were the typical indentured labor during the colonization period, which were taken by the British for working in plantations and other things. In fact, interestingly, in one of the in last unit, when we were talking about the Japanese diaspora, a huge Japanese diaspora is there in Mexico. We kind of wondered, how did Japanese diaspora reach Mexico? And when I kind of did some research, very interestingly, one of the reasons why Japanese reached Mexico was there was a set of Christian Japanese who decided to travel to Vatican, and when they took the sea route, they landed at Mexico. The second time Japanese settled in Mexico was the fact that there was a period of time when Japan was in isolation. And when Japan came out of isolation, Mexico was the first country to recognize Japan. So history also, and that is the interesting part of diasporic studies, diasporic and migration studies, because it's a lot of interdisciplinary studies and history, anthropology, sociology, and a whole lot of subjects come into being. This was a very interesting map in terms of how, for example, they went to Africa, from which place they migrated to UK, and how they went to Canada, how the migration is happening to Canada and the US and New Zealand and Australia. And I also got this slide on to remittances. So if you see the South Asian countries, the kind of India obviously leads in terms of remittances. And look at Nepal having almost 25% of its GDP out of remittances, whereas India is about 3%. This is a 2021 estimate. Again, remember, these estimates are by various agencies. And this is by Ratha et al. In 2021. So it depends on who is doing the research and what is the methodology for research. So this is the kind of remittances which are coming to South Asia. So looking at a little bit about the history, refers to people who are from the Indian subcontinent. They have been in the United States since 1700. Their larger presence starts around 1800. In fact, some of the earlier South Asian settlers were North American. Now you need to understand at that moment, Punjab and Bengal were not partitioned. So, so essentially it could be anywhere from Punjab and anywhere from Bengal, but more likely it would be near the ports, port cities. A number of Muslim Bengali peddlers first arrived in New Orleans, where they later integrated with communities of color. Around the same time, migrants from Punjab, primarily Sikh men, made their ways to the west coast of Canada. So again, you need to see how this migration happened, how did these communities form, and when did the diasporic movements happen. It has a long history of people moving to these places and moving out of South Asia. So I managed to get this photograph from what is called the South Asian American Digital Archives. These were the Indian farm laborers in San Joaquin, however you pronounce it, Valley Island in 1909. So this grainy picture was there in their South Asian American Digital Archives. And 1917, the US Congress passed an Immigration Act which restricted migrants from Asiatic zone. And in 23, the United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind. So this essentially is a Sikh gentleman. The US Supreme Court ruled the South Asians were ineligible, and the places which they had marked as Asiatic barred zones were this. I was able to pick up this map also. This is not a part of your unit, but this is some additional information that I was able to pick up. So if you see, these are the lines in terms of the barred regions. And it was only in 46 that naturalization rights were given to South Asian and Filipinos, but the number of migrants allowed were limited. And it was only in 65 that the immigration quotas was abolished, forever changing the racial demographics of US. So look at the fact, the fight from 1700 or 1800, whenever the South Asian migrated, went on and ended in 65. It took so many years for them to be natural. And if you look at that, interestingly, India was the place where everybody could easily come. Over a period of history, we have seen how India was naturally welcoming to a lot of people from all over the world. And what you had heard about the Armenian diaspora, the Armenian people came out here. For members of South Asian diaspora, ethnic, religious, and cultural identity may serve as a conduit between them and their ancestors. In fact, there is a strong belief that downplaying these facets of their South Asian identity is a betrayal of these ancestors. And I think this is something there in a lot of diasporic communities where there's this pressure that if you're forgetting, then you are not, being true to your ancestors. South Asian diasporas are inextricably linked to and shaped by, and they're shaped by three structural narratives: post-colonialism, racial and ethnic formation, and globalization. And I'll touch a little bit on all three. Remember, 200 years of colonization did affect the people of South Asia in terms of their outlook to the world, what we call as otherization. So the post-colonial theory of Said and Fanon have shown that dominant regimes of representation in colonial context deeply influence the way in which members of the colonial society imagine themselves in relationship to others. So inevitably, the way colonization affected people, for example, a large part of the narrative was pushed down the South Asian throat, was that their culture was inferior to the white culture or to the British culture or to the Western culture. And you can see a lot of these signs today also in terms of, when you try and compare and feel inferior or superior in terms of race, in terms of characteristics. So this was an effect of the, the colonization relationship to the other, and also reveal the devastating impact of otherization on the colonized subject. We still go through this. We are there and there are the others. So that was the effect of the colonization. And then there was this thing about racial and ethnic formations. South Asians maintain specific ethnic niches within hybrid and mixed societies. For example, Caribbean countries, Trinidad, Guyana, Indians in racially split national South frameworks, communities in Fiji and South African alternately accept and reject the racial domination. In fact, there was this major conflict in Fiji because the political dominance between Indian and their natives played out some time back. It still plays out. So alternatively accept and reject their racial dominance. For example, Indians arrived in England as lascars, sailors, worked on British cargo ships as ayahs, nannies. They followed the British Empire's material, financial, and reproductive paths. Those who remained in London became target of racist social. Indians faced a lot of racism across in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, currently, in fact, a couple of years back, there was this racial tensions between Indians and Africans in South Africa. There were riots. So it moves between what I said was alternatively accept and reject the racial dominance. And the third factor was the globalization. Indian diaspora and multiculturalisms are critical in the evolution of Indian society. We have talked a lot about. In fact, I joined Annie in her presentation on the Armenian diaspora, and if you notice, she did make a statement and said the Armenians in India were allowed to keep their culture, and India was had this great thing about integration. Remember, in one of the early units, we talked about the difference between integration and assimilation. Countries like US believe in assimilation. They want all cultures to be assimilated in the American culture, whereas the Indian way throughout history was more in terms of integration. And we also talked in some of the earlier units about how multiculturalism is actually detrimental in a way, because multiculturalism almost means that everybody manages their own culture without really understanding each other's culture. Whereas interculturalism or cross-culturalism was a much better term. In fact, initially, numerous indentured plantation and passage workers moved from India throughout history of Indian diaspora. Colonial era, similar scenario, but and typically when this indentured plantation and passage workers moved, they carried symbols or artifacts or art of India to remind them of their homeland. Remember, these were indentured, they were bonded labor. So they had to keep their body and soul together and this was the way they remembered. Whereas today, things have changed, and today with globalization, with fast transportation, with internet and the new media, the connections become that much easier. And also the type of people who are moving, educated people are moving in terms of economy and so on and so forth. And the nation in some way remains a vital building block, a screenplay for cultures that have been established and the presence of South Asians in countries outside of South Asia. So inevitably, the nation becomes some sort of a screenplay for their connections. So initially, it was the cultural continuity produced by imported Indian symbols. Rituals made life easy for the old diaspora, bearable. After 47, especially after the tumult of a partition and, typically countries, India and Pakistan coming about, and then subsequently Bangladesh, region, language, caste, and religions have become fertile grounds for subjectification, both within and outside a nation-state ambitions. less suppressed in the post-independence period. So things have changed. And I guess, as, with globalization and with easy movement, with media being available, this was bound to happen. History of South Asia is marked by centuries of movement, migration, resettlement, vibrant hybrid cosmopolitan culture. This was a research in 2011. There are also repositories of memories of homeland, often grounded in imaginary myths of unity and essence. There is still possibly a whole lot of, let's say, an Indian diaspora who moved before partition would still have the memory of a unified India. For example, people from, when we look at people from Pakistan, what would they look at in terms of history of Pakistan? So inevitably, the history of Pakistan and the history of India happen to be the same. So then there is this thing of conflict. How do you reconcile to all that which is happening politically? And then myths of unity and essence, to the point the diaspora can also become bastions of reactionary thinking and facet rememorations. So inevitably, the diaspora still has those memories of a unified sense, whereas politically, the nations have moved. In fact, so many times this discourse comes in that possibly the NRIs are much more ancient than the modern India, because India has moved a lot, whereas the memory of the diaspora is still of that older India, which has moved. And that is where they kind of become bastions of reactionary thinking and fascist rememorations. This was Mishra's research. South Asian communities marked by violent histories of subcontinent. Partition was a violent, the Sri Lankan civil war. What's happening in Afghanistan? Nepal went through a large period of disruption. So there are Myanmar, if you see, lots of disruptions happening. Bangladesh went through, a major disruption in 70 when it became an independent country. Communal violence, civil wars, and memories of this event showcase the haunting quality of traumatic experiences, making the past being constantly articulated in the present. So much so that a whole lot of people, especially all our generations, are post-partition generations. Then how is these generations carrying forward the partition memories? So somewhere the traumatic experiences makes the past being constantly articulated in the present. And that seems to continue. So if I was to look at the South Asian diaspora through literature and films, so I picked up I said, let's pick up a little case studies. The unit, if you read the unit, when you get the unit and you read the unit is, they have, whoever is written is written a little abstract, and there are a lot of theories which have been put in, which we have studied over the past so many units. So I tried to bring in, some extra material which I was able to research, which gives an idea about how these diaspora pan out and how do they, relate with their homeland. So the relation between past and present, historical memory of traumatic events. In fact, this Demantus Valencunas article, Haunting Memories, he's written this article about the Sri Lankan civil war, and he has looked at literature and films through two forms of different cultural production. Remember, even the cultural production, media typically becomes a cultural production. So what Annie was talking about, how the Armenian diaspora carries forward their understanding and their knowledge and their remembrances about the genocide is through talk shows, is through films, is through events. typically media becomes, has this role of cultural production. So, and again, who produces this culture? Is it a local? Again, the point of view of, the partition from an Indian point of view, or from a Pakistani point of view, or from a British point of view will totally be different. So he's looked at love marriage, a Sri Lankan American author and a French filmmaker, Deepan, hailing from different cultural backgrounds, explores and discuss the traumatic legacies of Sri Lankan civil war in diasporic spaces. How do these literature and films come about? How do the diasporas look at these, and how are they able to relate? Valkonius argues that the novel and the film functions as a trauma narrative, which insists on the haunting quality of the war-related memories and experiences, emphasizing trauma, transnational, and transhistoric aspect as it continues to possess its subject. Typically, what the partition literature does, emphasizes trauma, transnational, and transhistoric aspect as it continues to possess its subjects, no matter of where they come from or where they are born. That cycle continues. And that's how diaspora is able to connect with the homeland. Memory remains a key aspect in the articles. The days of the plenty, image of the. So this there was this these photographs of these Malayali migrants in the Arabian Gulf, and this was done by Muhammad Shafiq Karyanikuril, and he's drawn on the idea of quiet reading. Investigates photographs of the South Indian migrant workers in the Gulf from 70s to 80s. Now, inevitably, the idea of migrants are ghettoization. The idea of migrants are, they are, typically pushed. They are in remembrances. Whereas what he found was that the migrants emerge as active negotiators of their place of destination, challenging the popular association of labor migration with ghettoization and despair. So there is no despair. So inevitably, more often than not, all these migrants who went to the US in 1700 and 1800 and actually became citizens in possibly 65, their second generation or third generation, they would have gone through a lot of struggle. And yet you see that they are active negotiators. So if somebody would have done research on them, so for example, in this case, you would see that they are actually the communities are doing active negotiations. Then there was this research on Jains and the role of religion. Jains have historically been involved in numerous transnational trade networks, forming diasporic communities in a number of different countries. And now with the digital media becoming an important arena to imagine, construct, and share the diasporic experience for members of the diasporic community and Jains living in India. So typically there is an active negotiation between Jains living in India and the Jains in a diasporic community. So Tiny Wackermans in her article Lost and Found Center and Periphery, the narratives of Jain diasporic experiences online. She did data collection from 2014 to 19, fieldwork in Belgium, UK, US, and India. In terms of online material in web pages, that Jain's diasporic and significant religion are constantly contested and negotiated both online and offline. So it's not a static thing that one may try and imagine. So it is constantly contested and negotiated. And enough Jains living outside India, even though they are considered an important target audience among web content developers. However, the Jain diaspora is also very actively engaged in producing digital content. And that's where the concept of global Jainism, where the diasporic community would create an alternate center for Jain philosophy. So there is this constant innovation which is happening. There is this constant negotiation, constant movement, constant innovation is happening. And that is here where multiple strains come out of in terms of culture. So this becomes a very interesting facet. Now, religion, diaspora, and homeland are linked not only in terms of religious practices, but also in the political arena. In fact, what is changing now is the current rise of nationalist movement, both in South Asia and abroad. It's not just in South Asia that this is happening. This is happening across the world. And this is in stark contrast with the European multicultural dream of the 90s. And there is, the myths of pure and essential identities brought about. And this is a backlash against multiculturalism. And this then affects the ways of imagining home and belonging both in the diaspora and the homeland. So there always is there is this multiple levels of negotiation. So on one hand, with the rise of possibly LGBTQ communities, there is a pushback against, by the heterosexuals in terms of them being wrong, or when when a multicultural society comes in, there's a pushback in terms of being pure and being national. So globalization and nationalism seem to be operating on the same plane. There is this fight on both levels. Similarly, as we talked about, science and religion are working on the same plane. Savita Manian and Brad Bullock in their article, so they did some work on the Indo-Caribbean diaspora, and they explored the point of interdependency between homeland and diaspora. And now with the advent of the digital media and the internet, that interdependency is increased multifold. The diaspora needs the homeland to sustain its memory and heritage, while the homeland in turn can manipulate diasporic needs to advance its own foreign policy agenda. Remember, in one of the earlier units, we had talked about intergenerational diaspora, whereas the first generation, which is rooted to the homeland, while the second generation assimilates more with the host country. But now with this media thing happening, and each home country also, outreaches to the diaspora, because the diaspora work as great PR agents or political, mobilizations, or in terms of political lobbying and so on and so forth. The homeland and the hostland diaspora then start connecting with each other, and which affects all generations of diaspora living out there. Let's look at a little bit about the Afghanistan diaspora. Interestingly, we look at Afghanistan in terms of the recent happenings in Afghanistan, but Afghanistan seems to be in a perpetual state of turmoil. Millions of people were forced to leave Afghanistan recently for Pakistan, Iran, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkey. 1,000 more were evacuated, marked a migration unprecedented in modern history. But and there was this article by the former education minister of Afghanistan called "The Constructive and Destructive Role of Afghanistan Diaspora" in a webzine called Asia Dispatches. And what he writes is group migration is not a new phenomenon. Migration started with the Republic Revolution and the fall of monarchy in 1973. It's been a prominent element of Afghanistan modern history going back to the 20th century. Afghanistan has been in conflict for almost half a century. So Afghanistan has been a playground for all the major powers of the world. Been in conflict for 7 million people have migrated abroad over a period of less than 750 years. Small percentage have left voluntary, whereas most have been pushed out because of the tumult. They have always occurred involuntary as a result of government collapses. And they talk about the fact that Afghanistan diaspora is not actually a diaspora, but a quasi-diasporic society, because it does not reflect a unified diaspora. So there, the diasporas or the quasi-diasporas understanding of the homeland, which is Afghanistan, is itself fractured, rather a divided and compartmentalized diasporic society, because members lack a social forum and do not fit a type of consciousness, same level of awareness, mental imaging, or dreams for Afghanistan, the home country. In the past 2 years, have failed to represent modes of cultural production. Inevitably, one of the important features is the modes of cultural production. Do not deploy a unified form of culture, tradition, and behavior to survive as a collective identity in host countries. And why they don't do that in terms of a unified form of culture, tradition, and behavior is because essentially its political active elites represent ethno-sectarian Afghanistan, do not have a constructed relationship with the majority, and they do not have a constructive related with the majority left behind in Afghanistan. So inevitably, if you see Afghanistan is fractured into multiple tribes. And the diaspora, and because the people who have gone abroad relate with their individual tribes rather than Afghanistan as a country. And that is why it is not called a diaspora, but it's called a quasi-diasporic society, not a diaspora. They are divided into sub-identities, sub-locality, and sub-politics. Because all politically active members of diasporic community either represent Tajik or Pashtun or Uzbek or Hazara or other ethnic identities. Or otherwise they represent the ideology or political parties to which they belong. And that is why they have been not able to get a unified Afghanistan identity. Has multiple perceptions of Afghanistan. Two are particularly common. One portrays Afghanistan as a beautiful homeland. The other depicts as a place that is never easy to live in. Those that harbor first perception believes Afghanistan has been victimized by the predations of offensive and greening hegemony power. And in this, one of the largest factor happens to be Pakistan. Those with a more hopeful perception believe it's still a desirable place to live, and they hope to return when there's a better opportunity. So that's how the their understanding or their they remember their homeland with, and because their homeland identity is so split, they are not able to come across as a unified diaspora. And then I picked up this article in CNBC News on brown Desi South Asian diaspora. In fact, this article tells a lot about why South Asian diaspora is not classified as an Asian diaspora, which we keep talking about. This is a 2021 article by Sakshi Venkatraman. And this article talks about from the Indian subcontinent, Indian and Pakistani immigrants were known as black in 80s in the UK. The US census classified them as white in 70. So they are called South Asian, brown, or Desi. These are the three terms which are dominant today in the US. And this also is the representation or how those people understand the South Asians. And the way they understand South Asian is the North Indian culture, because remember, a lot of Punjabis reached out in this place first. So US are more familiar with butter chicken, naan, Hindi speaking, and Bollywood movie. Although they don't represent a majority of people, these tropes people need to conform to these tropes. For example, Bangladeshis in New York City have historically labeled their restaurant as Indian to attract more customers. So a large part of them identify them as Indians. That's how the majority trope works. Many South Asians say they have no relation at all to the term Asians or Asian Americans. Don't get included and they're not often recognized as Asian Americans. So Asian Americans are now South Asians. Asian Americans typically are the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese. Okay. Let's sum up. 7 countries, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan. South Asians are noted to have been in the United States since 1700. Larger presence starts in 1800. Settlers in North America from the regions of Punjab and Bengal. These were the unified Punjab and Bengal, are inextricably linked to and shaped by 3 structural narratives of post-colonialism, racial, ethnic formation, and globalization. And these are some of the references: post-colonial transformation, the national imagination, mapping the nation, on the dark side of nation, politics of multiculturalism, and South Asian diaspora. You can check that out. Let me stop this share and let me. Any questions?
Sir, I have 2 questions, but I don't know whether it pertains to this class or not.
Jaya,
Can I
go
ask?
ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. My first question is, sir, your voice is not audible.
I can hear you, Jaya. Jaya, I can hear you.
Okay, sir. Okay, my first question is, there is a term which we use called Grimitya. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it right. So, Grimityas are the indentured laborers from British India.
Okay.
So nowadays, we have Pravashya Bharatiya Divas and all those schemes, right? So we are bringing, providing certain benefits to Grimityas also.
Okay.
So whether we are considering only those who are born in the Indian political boundary as Grimityas or the entire British India, like we have the South Asian countries, right, under British India, even they are considered to be Grimityas.
Right. No, you're right. I am not sure, but I think they would. Sada, you are there?
Yes, I was listening. So I thought this question I can also answer.
Please answer.
Okay. So Girmitya, actually, they are called indenture and Girmitya both interchangeably. And this is a contract labor. 5-year contract. After that, they can renew or they can be free. So there are different, actually during British time and French time and those time, the first phase of labor was Girmitya because, slavery was abolished. Correct. And they thought similar to slavery, something very bound, means contractual, where they cannot escape. They kept this as Girmitya or indentured labor because this is called also slavery, second slavery. So this kind of labors you can find in all plantation labors, plantation economy, which either French or British, in Mauritius, in Malaysia, in Trinidad, Tobago, and all. This is the earliest form of labor migration from India during colonial time, and this was abolished after the protest and some kinds of British consciousness. I think within British Empire also and within Britain there was protest against the slavery and this kind of exploitation. Then they abolished that. Even Mahatma Gandhi also protested and mobilized this against.
Sada, her question was in the Pravasiya Bharatiya Divas, do the Indian government consider Grimitias from other parts of South Asia, or who were initially in the political Indian boundary? That was a question.
No, that's what I'm coming. Actually, little bit explanation is required.
Okay.
So they are actually, you cannot uniformly make any policy to indentured labor in terms of citizenship or engagement with India. So some they don't accept India's link actually openly, because they have their own issue. Like in Malaysia, they have a racism, and other places they are. Even you also, we don't accept them so much. Indians are also part of exploitation in Myanmar and other places. So usually there is no uniform thing that Indian government can engage them. So there is lots of differences. Whereas Trinidad, Tobago, Mauritius and all, they're little bit free to interact with India. We cannot expect same with Malaysia, Myanmar and other, because you see these are all area of conflict, and Indians are very small minority there. So there is a difference how India, Pravasi Divas and all, there is some kinds of differences in engaging them.
Okay.
Did I answer?
Jaya dropped off. I think her net connection didn't work. So tell me one thing. To taking this forward, so the indentured laborers would typically, the third or the fourth generation of the indentured labor would be there somewhere in various parts of the country. For the Pravas, so they need to have an OCI card. If they have an OCI card, they can only have an OCI card if they were born in the political boundaries of India.
That OCI card also given to Sindhis who are in Pakistan, political boundaries during British time.
During British time, okay. So Jaya has come back. Jaya, were you able to listen to Sada's answer to you, or did your connection break before that? Jaya?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to listen to Sada's answer before your connection broke?
No, sir, but I will see it in the YouTube video.
Jaya, I just wanted to say that it was Indian political boundary during British time, because many, there was lots of movement of Sindhis coming back to India, or many they went from Pakistan to other place. Then Muslims come from India to Pakistan, Bangladesh, Hindus. So it was the political boundary of during British time. So
during
those
British
are
time.
the British.
Okay. Jaya,
but there
what's
are
your...
differences.
Sorry, Sada.
There are differences because many don't accept to
sir.
call them as Indian diaspora also, because they are assimilated and they have political compulsion.
Okay. Jaya, your second question?
Okay, sir, got it. Yes. Can I ask the second question?
Second question.
Sir, this week in UPSC mains exam, there was one question related to Indian diaspora. The question was, the Indian diaspora has sealed new heights in the West. Describe its economic and political benefits for India.
Okay. So?
My question is that, we have and all.
We have?
Yes, the economic benefits because of their prosperity in enterprise and other. You can see the remittance, investment, knowledge, what is that? Knowledge partnership. All these areas we have already benefited in IT sector, healthcare sector. So these are visible area. Remittance, India is receiving highest, and partly from these Western countries also, and remaining from Gulf countries. So these are economic benefit. Political benefit, you must have seen, even Yeremyan also taught. So they form as a lobby group and kind of, pressure group in West and other countries. So this is called also soft power diplomacy, which is always in advantage of India. So these two benefits because of their own prosperity. country can receive. But it is also a double-edged sword. If you don't manage, they can also create problem. Like today's context, you can see the issue of Sikh, they are our diaspora, but we can mishandle that and it can create a problem. Can you hear? Abhay?
Yes, sir. I can
Yeah,
hear you.
yeah. Jaya has understood.
Yes.
Jaya, what we have been talking about the fact that when you have a diaspora out there who is, producing your culture out there, then you bring about a visibility. There is a soft visibility and then there is a hard political visibility. So today, the Indian diaspora, let's say in the US and Canada, actively engage with the local politics, with the local economics to bring about the India's point of view. So today, for example, the Indian-Canadian conflict in terms of communication or understanding of an issue. Obviously, a part of the diaspora is looking, see, there is a political angle to it. We have talked about a political angle. So there's a political angle because, for example, Sikhs in Canada today are 2% of the population, whereas in India, they are 1.71%. So they do influence today politics in both home as well as host countries. And that is why it's very important for countries to manage their diasporas. For example, I see a lot of loose statements coming from a lot of people who are in home as well as in host countries, which could lead to misunderstanding between nations, because today media plays a very important part of movement very fast. Yes, Kangar, Sundar Pichai, Nadela's contribution. See, these are not only economic powerhouses because they lead these companies, US companies. They are also able to do political lobbying in terms of. So, for example, when today the British Prime Minister is of an Indian origin, now that does a lot of good for India in terms of the world seeing that there's a British origin Indian Prime Minister heading Britain, Indian origin person heading Britain as a Prime Minister. Veera, sorry, Jaya, is that clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Veera.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
Coming to this unit, that is a South Asian
Diaspora.
today's unit, diaspora. What in global view, what is the main feature of this South Asian diaspora, sir? Because most of the South Asian countries, if you consider, they always want to consider themselves as a religious person rather than nationalist. Like in Pakistan, Afghanistan, most of this ethnic community, they want to consider themselves as a Islam, whatever religious persons, not in Pakistanis or Afghanistanis. In this point of view, what is the main feature? Means most of the ethnic conflicts are there in the South Asian, I think.
Veera, one needs to understand that ethnicity is there across. For example, in China also there are ethnicities and there are conflicts which happens. Uyghur, if you would have heard about, there's a Uyghur. For example, Burma, Rohingyas, the Buddhists. So each country has its own set of ethnic issues. Now, again, remember, identities are multiple identities. We work with multiple identities. So, for example, I have an identity of a male. I have an identity of a teacher. I have an identity of a father. I have an identity of a country. I'm an Indian. I have an identity of a religion. I could have a sub-identity in terms of the region I come from or, my sexual orientation. So all people have multiple identities. Now, again, the fact is, remember, there is this national identity. Is the national identity able to subsume all other identities or other identities take hold? So, for example, if you have noticed in India, for example, today there are a lot of sub-identities which are taking shape in terms of caste. Now, why would this happen? This also happens because of as we grow and as media connects and as, the larger identity loosens up. So, for example, when I said the old diaspora would carry, artifacts or articles of faith, that was the way their connection back to the homeland. But today with media, there are multiple ways to identify with the home country. So I might identify with India, but at the same time, I might identify with the Punjabi culture. Does not mean I'm not identifying with India. I might identify with my religion as Sikhism. Does not mean I don't identify with India. Now, how do these identities negotiate with each other? We would have to see. And when these identities are not negotiating well with each other, then inevitably one identity comes and sits over the other identity. And then remember, there are all these politicians who try and do identity politics. When you start going into identity politics, then you get into conflicts. For example, look at the case of America. America is a nation of immigrants. So, and if America comes out with a policy and says immigration is bad or these immigrants are, you're doing identity politics, which can lead to, then it becomes a slippery slope. Sada, if you would like to add.
No, very interesting. In fact, it is, I have observed this also in context of Malaysia and other. When the number grows, identity also, politically they mobilize. In South Africa, you must have, there are no bigger Indian identity, rather Tamil versus India in South Africa. Because Tamilians are more, so they don't consider themselves as India. But there is Tamil identity and Indian identity. So in Malaysia also, since large number of them they are from Tamil Nadu, they have bigger identity. They on secondary basis they call themselves as Indian. So it depends upon where the numbers are more.
Absolutely.
And how they identify.
Kangat, you are absolutely right. Kangat was writing this in the chat. Out there in the West, for example, in Britain and UK, Indians and Pakistanis come together very well. But today, if you see, there is some sort of an import which is coming from India and Pakistan and affecting the diasporic communities. And that, there is this cross flow of, and again, as we talked about in this unit, a lot of times the diasporic communities, because they've got stuck into some mythical ideas of the homeland, they tend to be much more fascist, or, their thought process becomes much more radicalized rather than, their home countries. And then they start influences. It becomes a negotiation between diaspora and homeland today in this globalized and connected world. So that is why it is very important for the political leaders, the ideology leaders, the economic leaders to be careful, because you start going, in a particular identity direction, it becomes a slippery slope, because everything is connected. Look at Manipur, everything was connected. And today I was just reading about this Manipuri singer who took up arms and who died in this conflict. Now, what is it affecting? Whom? Common language, common place, common country. But that's how the identity plays out. So identity becomes a very important factor to understand. Veera?
I have a question.
Sure. Just a minute. Shrishta. Veera?
Okay.
Veera?
Yeah, understood, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Shrishta.
Sorry to have interrupted.
No.
Earlier. So my question pertains to a specific diaspora. For instance, the Chinese diaspora living in a place like the United States. Now we know that the kind of what the media portrays to us is that there is a rivalry that exists between China and America on a global trade, economic, political scale, and it's not it's not something that is directly being shown to us. Maybe there is so much more to it that we haven't yet come to understand.
But at the same time, I think of it as a question. The Chinese diaspora then in the United States, how do they negotiate their ethnic identity with sort of a in a host country, which is in a sort of a political rivalry, maybe not as much explicitly, but yes, in an implicit way it is. How does that happen?
Should I go first?
Yes, yes, please.
Shresha, it always is a tricky, negotiation. So if you remember when there was a large Japanese diaspora in Hawaii before Japan attacked America. These were Japanese American, American Japanese, Japanese American. And when Japan attacked America during World War II, all of them were interned. So diaspora negotiation also becomes extremely tricky. But also today, the host country also understands. So today, for example, the biggest powerhouses to run America are the Indians and the Chinese in terms of, intellectual capital, in terms of social capital, in terms of economic capital. So largest amount of, investment in America is being done by the Chinese. So what you see in the media might be a political part of the viewpoint, but remember in a capitalist, military kind of, globalized industrial world, things are much way different. And that's how, and that's where, and then also these diaspora then politically engage. So today, if you see, your vice president of America is of Indian descent. Two candidates who are running for the next year's presidential elections are of Indian descent. So obviously, that is where you you are involved, actively involved in the host society in terms of negotiating in their politics. At the end of the day, it's the politics which work. So it always is a difficult thing. See, Shrestha, it's as difficult as the Bihari labor in Kerala or Maharashtra, or the Madhya Pradesh labor in Haryana. You look at India as a great example of the world. So how difficult it is for the Bihari laborer to work in Maharashtra when there will be an identity politics of Maharashtra being for Marathis. So they negotiate. So they are involved in the economy, they are involved in the politics, they have their culture out there, they play out their culture. Religion works out the same way. You have to work it out. Otherwise, inevitably there's a conflict which harms everybody today because we are all connected. Sada? If you would like to add.
Yes. No, that is, you have given both international context and Indian context is very, very appropriate. But throughout history, I think economy and politics, they fight also. If you see the kind of, mostly Western area, America, Europe and all, there is an industrial lobby which actually run through demand and supply of labor. And they pressure and they bring, and that is how the society also benefit. American societies always depend upon immigrant, but the politics takes over when there is unemployment, local, issues and all. So that is always there. And Chinese and Indians, not just Chinese, I think we told Chinese, but Indians also part of the slogan during, Trump and other, that these people are taking our job. Even Obama also told. So they are all targeting any outsider, but they cannot help because it is an industrial hub also. They are equally controlled by industry. So they are equally controlled by local politics. So it is like Robert told, people negotiate. Same with Malaysia. Chinese are 27%. They control the economy. There is a very anti-Chinese movement, not just in Malaysia, across area, even Taiwan,
Southeast Asia,
and even other part of Asia, Vietnam and all. But they cannot help because they have control over the economy. So conflict will go, people will negotiate. And that is what happening across the region, I think. Even in India also, we are told, even we are fighting with labor. Whereas America is fighting with not just labor, they are entrepreneur also. So this is a very natural thing happening in all society.
Okay, Shesha?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I've got my
Okay.
answer.
Kangat has also written Chinese students are the largest student community in the US. US universities have campuses in China. Obviously, with globalization, there's a different level of connections, and then economic becomes the underpinning for all these things which are happening around. So when, as Sada said, when economy goes bad in terms of unemployment or other things, then the identity politics start nudging at the economic part, and there are other things which come about.
Yes, German also recently opened up, because they have to compete with other country economically.
Correct.
And
Any
there
other?
are some
Sorry.
other area of I tell you, Western society has gone the demographic transition, aging population and all. They cannot help also. They have to bring more labor from other countries
They need to.
for various other reasons.
True. Any other questions? Okay. If there are no other questions, then we close today. You have a nice weekend. Nice weekend, and next week we meet with the West Asia Diaspora, case studies on West Asia Diaspora.
Thank you, Abha. It was very interesting. I also happy today.